The keepers of Zephyria had watched Earth for 3,000 rotations of their twin suns. They were ancient beings, tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like moonlight on water. Their civilization had flourished for millions of years, built on principles that seemed simple but were absolute. Never interfere with developing worlds. Never make contact with primitive species, and most importantly, never communicate with the young of any race. This last rule was their most sacred taboo, written in stone monuments across their 7 worlds. Children, they believed, were vessels of pure possibility, untainted by the fears and limitations that shaped adult minds. To touch a young mind with advanced knowledge was considered the greatest violation possible, capable of destroying entire civilizations by robbing them of their natural development. But Zephyria was dying. Commander Thalen stood in the observation deck of their greatest ship, the Eternal Wanderer, watching Earth's blue marble spin slowly in the cosmic darkness. His silver eyes, which had seen the birth and death of stars, now carried the weight of impossible choices. Behind him, the Council of 12 waited in silence, their bioluminescent markings pulsing with anxiety. "The quantum cascade failure cannot be stopped," announced Chief Scientist Lyra, her voice echoing in the crystalline chamber. "Our sun cores are collapsing faster than predicted. We have perhaps 50 rotations before our worlds become uninhabitable." The Zephyrians had built their civilization on harmony with their environment, but a cosmic accident had triggered a chain reaction in their solar system's core. Their technology, advanced as it was, could not stop the collapse. They needed a new home, but their rigid laws forbade them from simply taking one. "What of the Andromedan colonies?" asked Council Member Vex. "Too far," Thalen replied without turning from the viewport. "Our population ships would not survive the journey. We need something closer. Something within reach." All eyes turned to Earth. It was perfect. Really. Similar atmosphere, compatible biology, abundant resources. But it was occupied by a young species still in its technological infancy. Under normal circumstances, the Zephyrians would rather face extinction than violate their non-interference protocols. "The humans are not ready," stated Elder Quinn, her ancient voice carrying the authority of centuries. "They still wage wars over resources and territory. They poison their own world and each other. Contact with them would only bring chaos." Thalen finally turned to face the council. His expression was grave, but there was something else there. Something that made the others lean forward with interest. "There may be another way," he said slowly. "Our cultural analysts have been studying human society for decades. They have identified something unusual about this species." He activated the central hologram, and images of Earth began to float before them. Children playing in parks, learning in schools, creating art with bright colors and impossible dreams. "Human children possess something extraordinary," Thalen continued. "They have not yet learned the limitations their adults impose on reality. They believe in magic, in other worlds, in the impossible. They dream of creatures from distant stars as friends, not threats." The council stirred uneasily. "Where was this leading?" "You are suggesting we contact their young," Elder Quinn said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You would have us commit the ultimate taboo." "I am suggesting," Thalen said carefully, "that we consider the possibility that our taboo was created for different circumstances. We forbade contact with children to protect primitive civilizations from corruption. But what if, in this case, the children could protect us?" The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of the ship's systems. The idea was so radical, so contrary to everything they believed, that it took time to process. Council Member Zara was the first to speak. "Explain your reasoning." Thalen touched the hologram controls, and the images changed to show children's drawings and stories about space visitors, fairy tales about magical beings, playground games involving aliens and fantastic adventures. "Human children already believe in us," he said. "Not in Zephyrians specifically, but in the concept of benevolent beings from the stars. They have created an entire mythology around such contact. If we approached them carefully, we might find allies rather than subjects to corrupt." "And what would we ask of these children?" demanded Elder Quinn. Nothing, Thalen replied. We would offer them truth in exchange for understanding. We would share knowledge appropriate to young minds. Show them wonders that adults would fear. In return, they might help us bridge the gap between our species and theirs. The debate that followed lasted for days. Half the council argued that the taboo existed for good reason, that contact with any primitive species was dangerous, regardless of age. The other half began to see the logic in Thalen's proposal. Human children were indeed unique in the galaxy for their openness to the impossible. Dr. Lyra presented scientific evidence supporting the plan. Our behavioral studies show that human children between the ages of 5 and 12 possess neuroplasticity that makes them ideal candidates for cross-species communication. They lack the fear responses that make adult humans violent when confronted with the unknown. But they also lack the judgment to understand consequences, argued Councilmember Wren. How can we trust them with knowledge that could reshape their world? Perhaps, suggested Thalen. That is exactly why we should trust them. Adults think in terms of weapons and advantage. Children think in terms of wonder and friendship. As their debate continued, reports came in from Zephyria. The quantum cascade was accelerating. Cities were beginning to evacuate as energy systems failed. Time was running out. Finally, Elder Quinn called for a vote. We face extinction if we do nothing, and possible damnation if we act. But perhaps, she said, her ancient eyes meeting Thalen's, it is time to trust in the innocence we have spent so long protecting. The vote was closer than anyone expected. 7 in favor, 5 against. For the first time in their recorded history, the Zephyrians would break their most sacred law. They would appeal to the children of Earth. Thalen stood again at the viewport. But now Earth seemed different somehow. Not just a world to be observed, but a possible salvation. Somewhere down there, in playgrounds and bedrooms and secret hideouts, were young minds that might hold the key to both species' futures. The preparations began immediately. They would need to choose their contacts carefully, find children who were ready for such knowledge but too young to be corrupted by it. They would need to develop communication methods that seemed natural to young minds but wouldn't alarm human adults. Most importantly, they would need to find a way to ask for help without destroying the very innocence they hoped to preserve. As the Eternal Wanderer moved into Earth's outer solar system, Thalen felt the weight of his species' survival on his shoulders. They were about to commit what their ancestors would consider the ultimate sin. But perhaps, he thought, some taboos were meant to be broken when the alternative was extinction. The children of Earth were about to receive visitors they had always dreamed of. The question was whether those dreams would become a nightmare for both worlds, or the beginning of something wonderful beyond imagination. The first transmission was sent 3 days later, aimed at a small town in the American Midwest where their scanners had identified several promising candidates. The message was simple, delivered in a way that would seem like imagination to adults, but feel real to young minds. The die was cast. The taboo was broken. Now all they could do was wait and hope that the children of Earth would understand what their own adults could not. 8-year-old Emma Martinez was building a fort out of couch cushions when the voice first whispered in her mind. She stopped, holding a pillow halfway to the growing structure, and listened. Her parents were in the kitchen arguing about bills, her little brother was napping, and the television was off, but she had definitely heard something. "Hello, little dreamer." The voice came again, gentle as wind chimes and somehow musical. "Do not be afraid." Emma looked around her living room in Millbrook, Ohio, checking corners and shadows. She was used to imaginary friends, but this felt different. More real somehow. "Who are you?" she whispered back, feeling slightly silly but curious enough to continue. "I am Kira," the voice replied. "I come from very far away, beyond the stars you see at night. I need your help." Emma Martinez. From orbit, Commander Thalen watched the bio readings from their first contact. The child showed elevated heart rate but no signs of fear or distress. Doctor, Lyra had been right about the neuroplasticity. Young humans seemed capable of accepting impossible communications as naturally as breathing. Her brain patterns indicate wonder rather than terror, reported Lyra from her monitoring station. The connection is stable. They had chosen Emma carefully after weeks of observation. She was imaginative but practical, kind to animals and smaller children, and most importantly, she had shown remarkable emotional resilience during her parents' recent divorce proceedings. If anyone could handle contact without psychological damage, it was her. "I dream about space people sometimes," Emma said, abandoning her fort entirely to sit cross-legged on the carpet. "Are you really real? As real as you are," Kira's voice assured her. Kira was their best child psychologist, chosen specifically for her gentle manner and understanding of young minds. "Emma, my people are in trouble. Our home is becoming dangerous, and we need somewhere safe to live. But we cannot talk to grown-ups the way we can talk to you." "Why not?" "Because grown-ups have forgotten how to believe in magic. They think everything unusual is scary or dangerous. Children like you still remember that the universe is full of wonders." Emma nodded seriously. This made perfect sense to her. Adults did seem to worry about everything, and miss the most obvious magic happening around them. "What kind of trouble are your people in?" she asked. Through the neural link, Kira shared carefully chosen images. Emma saw beautiful crystal cities under purple skies, graceful beings who moved like dancers, and then the creeping darkness of dying suns. Nothing too frightening, but enough to convey the urgency of their situation. "Oh," Emma breathed, her eyes wide with sympathy. "Your world is getting broken." "Yes. And we wondered if perhaps the children of Earth might help us figure out how to talk to your adults. Not to trick them or hurt anyone, but to ask for friendship." Back on the ship, the council monitored this first exchange with growing amazement. The human child had immediately understood their plight and responded with compassion rather than fear. No Zephyrian child would have been so naturally accepting of contact from unknown beings. "Request permission to expand the contact network," Thalen asked Elder Quinn. "Granted. But carefully, Commander. We are walking through a minefield of our own making." Over the following days, Kira made contact with 12 more children across different continents. There was Marcus in London, who immediately asked if they needed help building new houses. Anna in Sao Paulo wanted to know if space people liked soccer. Yuki in Tokyo offered to draw them pictures of flowers from Earth. Each child reacted with the same fundamental kindness that had marked Emma's response. The children began to think of Kira as their special friend, someone who trusted them with grown-up problems because they were smart enough to help. They started sharing ideas about how to help the space people, suggestions so innocent and pure that they brought tears to Zephyrian eyes. "We could have a big party," suggested Marcus during one conversation. "My mum says parties make everyone feel welcome." "Maybe they could live in the empty houses in my neighborhood," offered Anna. "There are lots of them. And they just sit there being sad." But it was Emma who came up with the idea that changed everything. "Kira," she said one evening while coloring at her kitchen table, "what if you just asked the grown-ups who used to be kids? I bet they remember believing in magic, even if they pretend they don't." "What do you mean, little one?" "Like Mrs. Patterson next door. She tells me stories about when she was little and thought fairies lived in her garden. And my teacher, Mr. Belp, Robert, still gets excited about dinosaurs like he's 6 years old. Maybe grown-ups aren't really grown up inside. Maybe they just forget how to show it." The simplicity of this observation hit the Zephyrian Council like a thunderbolt. They had been thinking about humans in terms of rigid categories: children and adults, believers and skeptics. But what if the human condition was more fluid than that? "The child may have identified something crucial, Doctor," Lyra said during the next council meeting. "Our studies show that humans retain emotional and psychological connections to their childhood selves throughout their lives. Perhaps the key is not to bypass adult humans, but to reconnect them with their younger selves." Thalen felt a spark of hope. "How would we accomplish this?" "The children could be our ambassadors," Lyra continued. "Not to reveal our existence directly, but to begin preparing their communities. If they start talking about friendship with space people, sharing stories we provide them, it might create openings." And so the second phase began. The contacted children started telling carefully crafted stories about friendly space visitors who needed help. They drew pictures, inspired by Kira's gentle images. They asked their parents questions about what they would do if someone from the stars needed a place to live. The adults' reactions were everything the Zephyrians had hoped for and feared. Most dismissed the stories as imagination, but they did so fondly, remembering their own childhood fantasies. Some parents found themselves drawn into the game, elaborating on their children's stories and adding details that showed they, too, could imagine benevolent contact with other worlds. Mrs. Patterson, Emma's elderly neighbor, surprised everyone by taking the stories completely seriously. When Emma told her about people from distant stars needing new homes, Mrs. Patterson nodded thoughtfully and said, "Well, dear, I suppose if they're nice people, it wouldn't matter where they came from originally. We all need help sometimes." Teachers began noticing that children were working together on projects about space exploration and interspecies friendship with an unusual level of cooperation and maturity. Art classes produced pictures of alien beings that were remarkably consistent across different schools and countries, all depicting the visitors as beautiful, peaceful, and slightly sad. But it was Marcus's father, Dr. James Reed, who provided the breakthrough they needed. Dr. Reed was an astrophysicist at Cambridge, a man who spent his days studying the cosmos and wondering about the possibility of life beyond Earth. When his son began telling elaborate stories about space people who wanted to be friends, Dr. Reed found himself listening with more than parental indulgence. "Dad," Marcus said one evening, "if space people were real and they needed help, you'd be nice to them, wouldn't you?" "Of course, son. Any being intelligent enough for space travel would probably have much to teach us, even if they looked different. Especially then. Imagine how wonderful it would be to meet someone from another world. What stories they could tell us. What knowledge they could share." That night, Dr. Reed found himself looking up at the stars and wondering if his son's vivid imagination might be touching something real. The boys' descriptions were remarkably detailed and consistent, and they painted a picture of beings who were clearly advanced but also vulnerable and kind. Unknown to him, Zephyrian sensors detected his elevated brain activity as he stared at the night sky. His adult mind was opening to possibilities that his scientific training had taught him to consider theoretical but his father's heart hoped might be real. "We have a potential adult contact," Thalen announced to the council. Dr. James Reed shows all the markers of receptivity to contact. His child has prepared the ground well. "Proceed with extreme caution," warned Elder Quinn. "This is where we risk everything." But Emma, Marcus, Anna, Yuki, and the other children had already done something extraordinary. They had begun to heal the gap between wonder and knowledge, between childhood dreams and adult reality. They had reminded their communities that magic and science were not enemies but partners in understanding the vast mystery of existence. The children didn't know it, but they had already accomplished what the Zephyrians thought impossible. They had made first contact, not just between two species, but between the forgotten child in every human adult and the infinite possibilities of the cosmos. Soon, it would be time for the next step. Soon, the adults would have to decide whether to trust in the magic their children had always known was real. Dr. James Reed was in his Cambridge observatory at 2:47 a.m. when the impossible happened. He had been working late, analyzing radio telescope data, when Marcus wandered in wearing his dinosaur pajamas. "Dad, Kira wants to talk to you," his 8-year-old son announced matter-of-factly. James looked up from his computer screens, exhausted but patient. "Marcus, you should be in bed." "Who is Kira?" "My friend from the stars. She says you're ready now." Before James could respond, the air in the observatory began to shimmer. The temperature didn't change, but suddenly the space felt different, charged with an energy that made his scientific instruments flutter and hum. Marcus stood perfectly calm, as if shimmering air was the most natural thing in the world. "Dr. Reed," came a voice that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere, melodious and unmistakably non-human. "Thank you for listening with an open heart." End quote. James Reed, a man who had dedicated his life to the rational study of the universe, felt his worldview restructuring itself in real time. Everything his son had told him over the past month suddenly shifted from imagination to memory, from fantasy to fact. "You're real," he whispered. We are very real, and we need your help. From the Eternal Wanderer, Commander Thalen watched this historic moment with a mixture of triumph and terror. After months of careful preparation through the children, they were making their first direct adult contact. Everything depended on this conversation. Kira materialized slowly, her form becoming visible as a translucent, graceful figure with opalescent skin and large, kind eyes. She was beautiful in a way that transcended human concepts of beauty. Clearly alien, but unmistakably benevolent. "My people are dying," she explained gently. "Our worlds are becoming uninhabitable. We have watched your species for thousands of years, waiting for you to mature enough for contact. But we have run out of time." Marcus climbed into his father's lap, as if interdimensional aliens appeared in their observatory every night. "See, Dad? I told you they needed help." James Reed's scientific mind raced through possibilities and implications, while his father's heart simply marveled at his son's courage. "What kind of help do you need?" "Permission to settle on your world, not to conquer or control, but to live alongside your people as neighbors. We have much knowledge to share. Technologies that could solve your environmental problems, cure your diseases, extend your reach into the cosmos. In return, we need only a chance to survive. Why approach us through children?" Kira's expression grew sad. "Because in our culture, contact with young minds is forbidden. We believed it would corrupt their natural development. But our children's psychologists discovered something wonderful about human youth. They possess a quality we had forgotten existed." "What quality?" "Trust without condition, love without judgment. Your children believed in us before they knew we existed. They welcomed us as friends before they understood what we were. They reminded us that some taboos are prisons we build for ourselves." The conversation continued for hours. Kira explained their civilization, their crisis, and their hopes. James asked questions that revealed both his scientific background and his growing wonder. Meanwhile, Marcus fell asleep in his father's arms, dreaming of space friends who had finally found their way home. But they were not alone. Across the globe, similar scenes were unfolding. In Sao Paulo, Anna's mother, Dr. Carmen Santos, was having her own encounter with a Zephyrian named Vel. Carmen was a pediatric surgeon who had noticed her daughter's unusual recent focus on helping others. When Vel appeared in their kitchen, Anna simply said, "Mama, this is my friend who needs our help to save her people." In Tokyo, Yuki's grandfather, a retired professor of philosophy, found himself in deep discussion with a Zephyrian elder about the nature of wisdom and the responsibility of advanced civilizations to preserve life. Yuki sat between them, translating concepts that seemed too complex for a child but which she understood perfectly. Each contact had been carefully chosen. The adults were people who had maintained connections to wonder, who worked in fields that dealt with life and growth and possibility. They were parents, teachers, healers, and scientists who had been unconsciously prepared by their children's stories over the past months. The reactions varied. Some needed hours to accept the reality of what they were seeing. Others, like Mrs. Patterson from next door to Emma, simply made tea and started planning how to help their new neighbors feel welcome. "I always knew," Mrs. Patterson told the Zephyrian who appeared in her garden. 70 years ago, I was a little girl who believed in magic. I never really stopped believing. I just learned to be quiet about it." Within a week, the secret network of adult contacts had grown to include 50 families across 23 countries. Each adult had been chosen because their children had identified them as ready, and each child had prepared the ground with months of gentle stories and questions. The Zephyrians marveled at what the human children had accomplished. Without any central coordination, they had identified the exact adults most likely to accept contact. They had intuited psychological readiness with an accuracy that surpassed any scientific screening method. But the real miracle was what happened next. Dr. Reed contacted his colleague Dr. Maria Vasquez at the European Space Agency. Dr. Santos called her friend at the WHO. Professor Tanaka reached out to former students, now working in various international organizations. Each contact was made carefully, adult to adult, scientist to scientist, but always with the backing of a child's absolute faith that everything would work out. The children didn't just make contact possible, they made it safe. When world leaders were finally briefed about the situation, they found themselves not just dealing with alien contact, but with a phenomenon that their own children had been preparing them for. The stories were already there. The emotional groundwork already laid. Instead of panic and fear, there was cautious hope and wonder. Emma found herself sitting in the United Nations building 3 months later, holding Kira's translucent hand, as diplomats from every nation worked out the details of the largest migration in galactic history. She didn't understand all the grown-up words they used, but she understood perfectly when Secretary General Chen smiled and said, "Welcome to Earth." The Zephyrian settlement zones were established in areas where environmental restoration was most needed. Their technology began cleaning the oceans, purifying the atmosphere, and healing damaged ecosystems. They didn't take land. They healed it and shared it. They didn't impose their culture. They enriched human culture with new perspectives and possibilities. The children who had made it all possible became the first Earth Zephyrian cultural ambassadors. They attended special schools where they learned about both worlds, becoming bridges between species. Emma learned to paint with light the way Zephyrians did. Marcus discovered that his love of dinosaurs extended to the ancient creatures that had once roamed Zephyrian worlds. Anna became fascinated with Zephyrian medicine, which treated not just the body but the spirit. But perhaps the most profound change was in human society itself. The successful contact had required adults to reconnect with their capacity for wonder, to remember that the universe was vast and full of possibilities. The children who had always known this suddenly found themselves valued for their wisdom rather than just their potential. Commander Thalen, now Earth's first Zephyrian ambassador, often walked through the settlement zones and marveled at what they had built together. Crystal spires rose beside human architecture, Zephyrian gardens bloomed with earth flowers, and children of both species played games that required no translation. "We saved our civilization by breaking our most sacred taboo," he told Elder Quinn during one of their evening conversations. "But in the end, the children saved us all." "Perhaps," the ancient Zephyrian mused, "that was the point. Perhaps some taboos exist, not to be followed forever, but to be broken at exactly the right moment, by exactly the right people." Emma, now 10 years old and fluent in 3 human languages plus Zephyrian, still visited Kira regularly. They would sit in the hybrid garden behind Emma's house, where earth roses grew alongside Zephyrian crystal flowers, and talk about everything and nothing. "Kira," Emma asked one day, "are you happy that we broke your taboo?" "Yes, little dreamer. But I think it was never really a taboo about contacting children. I think it was a taboo about forgetting that we all remain children at heart, no matter how old we grow. So grown-ups just forgot how to be kids? And children like you help them remember." Emma nodded sagely, then went back to her drawing. She was working on a picture for the new Museum of Interspecies Friendship, a crayon and colored pencil masterpiece showing beings from 2 different worlds, holding hands under the same stars. The Zephyrians had committed their ultimate taboo, and discovered that some boundaries exist to be transcended. The children of Earth had proven that wisdom and wonder were not opposites, but partners. Together, they had shown the universe that the most profound solutions often come from the most innocent questions, and in the end, breaking one civilization's most sacred rule had saved 2 worlds and created something new and beautiful that belonged to both.